Welcome to the Sales Olympics. Bonjour, bienvenue à les Jeux Olympiques. Je pense que jour 7, day 7, bienvenue à les Jeux Olympiques. Hi, everyone who's out there. This is day 7 of the Sales Olympics. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I hope that everyone recovered from yesterday's topic. We had such a meaty topic, so much chat back and forth. Everyone who is watching, good morning to everyone who is watching. I'm sure that there's a lot of people that are tuning in. Mari already said good morning. Good morning, Mari. How you doing? Out of curiosity, I want to know, does everyone eat breakfast? Do people eat breakfast? What do they eat if they eat breakfast? Mine's always coffee, but I'm curious to know what everyone's morning routine is for some reason. I think when I think of bonjour, I think of the Belle song in Beauty and the Beast when she's like going around picking up bread and stuff. So anywho, if you're watching this, please jump in the chat. If you could tell me where you're tuning in from, and you could give me your favorite breakfast food, whether you eat breakfast, whether you eat breakfast on the go. I want to see everyone what your morning ritual is. Hi, James. How's it going? So welcome to day no one meal a day team. One meal a day. Savage. I love that. I do also one meal a day. I don't eat until, like, true story, 2 a.m. and then I go to bed. My mom always calls me and she's like, 2 things. Did you do the Wordle? I'm like, yes, Mimi, I did the Wordle. And she's like, you need to go to bed. Wordle first, then bed. No breakfast, 16-8 fast. Man, we got a lot of really disciplined people in here. I'm very impressed with everyone's setup. So welcome to day 7 of the Sales Olympics. We're going to be covering a very meaty topic. I hope that everyone is doing well out there who's watching. We got Raisin Bran. Love me some good Raisin Bran. So we're going to be diving into ROI, COI, what's the difference, why both are a dead end, and what you can do instead. So there was a lot of replay, I would say, from yesterday, meaning I got a lot of different emails, different comments about yesterday's session. And I looked back and I saw in the chat that there were 2 really good questions. There is a question from James about inbound versus outbound and how status quo compares, basically. And there was a great question also from, Justin, on COI and diagnosing, and wouldn't hypothetically you be asking about indicators in either case scenario. So we're going to be covering both of those questions, just so you know, James and Justin, if you're watching. I haven't seen you in chat yet. But if you are watching, we're going to be covering both of those questions basically after section 2, which is this portion on COI. So why don't we go ahead without further ado and jump in. The topic on deck is what is COI, what is ROI, what's the difference, and what should you do instead? So essentially what ROI is, and I think that everyone's pretty familiar with this, is return on investment. So this is how a seller, or how when a seller pursues this or sells according to ROI, they're essentially trying to calculate for the buyer what are the typical benefits that they'll see from using a product. So typically what I see, and if y'all could jump in the chat, there's usually only 2 benefits that everyone talks about, that no one has enough of, that everyone wants more of. There's only 2 things in everyone's life that no one has enough of and everyone wants more of. I want to see if anyone can guess them, what they are in the chat. There's 2 elements that everyone's usually talking about that they want some more of within their life. But the point is, for ROI, basically, it means 2 things. Number 1, it means you're agnostic. James got it. Time and money. Brilliant, James. Hey, Justin, he just dinged in. We're going to cover your question in portion 3. So time and money. Time and money are the 2 benefits that people pursue. And what it shows basically is 2 things within selling. Number 1, that you're completely agnostic of a problem, meaning you're agnostic of a metric. So a marketer hypothetically wants to save time and money. So does a salesperson. They want to save time and money. You know, HR leader wants to save time and money. CX leader wants to save time and money. So it's usually in people's head, like the safe safety blanket lying underneath that everyone knows that they want. But it means that you're completely agnostic of the actual problem that they're trying to solve. So the problem in no case scenario is that they're trying to save time and save money. If I'm an SDR, I'm not just trying to save time and save money. In the case that I need to trim down the time that it takes to send my emails, it's because I want to increase the quantity of the emails so I can increase the conversion into SQL so I can hit my quota attainment goal of SQL, for instance. So saving time on is a piece of that, but it's agnostic completely of a problem. So what ROI typically comes into play is within status quo deals. So we talked about this at length yesterday, but essentially there's two ways that you lose status quo. In outbound, there's two types of scenarios that you lose deals. The first one is status quo, and this is where people start pursuing ROI, essentially. So status quo is object in motion stays in motion, object at rest stays at rest. In status quo, it means they don't think the problem is big enough. They're at rest. They don't think the problem is big enough to essentially mobilize to buy, right? So people are trying to mobilize them from a place of being static to a place of where they're going to actually solve for something. And how they're pursuing that in this case scenario is they're talking about all the returns that they'll get on this platform, essentially. So there's three different ways that people pursue this, but essentially what this state of mind is, and keep in mind, you're only going to lose in your closed loss deals. Only about 40% are going to be lost to status quo. And I would argue that it's almost always over outbound. So industry conversion to close one for inbound is 35%. For outbound, it's 6%. Because inbound, they're already past the stage of status quo, meaning they're coming to you and they realize that the problem is big enough. When you're pursuing outbound, this is the primary channel where a status quo, diagnosing things that they don't know to get them to mobilize to buy would hypothetically be used. So we can put aside, if you apply any of these techniques basically to an indecisive deal, then it's going to hurt you. But what people are trying to drill up in this stage is fear, uncertainty, and doubt, right? So they're trying to drill up in the person's mind, the prospect's mind, of all of the amazing things that they will miss out on, all of the great things that they will get as a return from buying this investment if they don't purchase today. So this is probably the most antiquated technique. I honestly don't see many people going the ROI channel, but I typically see it come up within presentation decks, like demo decks. You know, people are talking about the countries that they're a part of, all their NASCAR slides, and then they start talking about the return on the investment. So anytime that you're hearing ROI techniques being used, either you're using them or someone around you is using them, basically it means that you're agnostic of a problem and don't know why they would buy as a persona. But the second thing is that you're going to be applying things to time and money, which is the benefit centric. So benefit centric is going to be the third, basically the third strongest type of selling, right? So whenever you pursue this angle, you'll see people asking questions. If they do ask questions, they'll be asking questions about how much do you pay for this current platform? How much time do people spend sending emails, for instance? But they're not asking the greater questions of what's the conversion rate? What's the open rate? What's the reply rate? What's the quota? How far is the delta between where you're at today and where's the quota number that you need to get to? So they're just going off of the fact and banking off of the fact that if they can tell the buyer and convince the buyer that it is worth it to buy this platform by talking about all the benefits that they will receive, then it will move the buyer from a place of I don't want to buy to I do want to buy. So it's going to be one of the most ineffective channels that you can use. But specifically, when you're applying those techniques to deals with an indecision, meaning they already have moved to decided to solve for it, but they're still not closing anyway, that's when you're going to see a dramatic drop off in your deals. Basically, if I try to remember, we said that we could save this amount of time, we could save this amount of money, these people will get this benefit from using the platform. then it's going to dramatically decrease the likelihood that that deal is eventually going to close whenever you apply those techniques to someone who has moved past the state of status quo and into indecision. So in summary, ROI is calculating out the benefits that someone will receive from your platform. It's specifically used in status quo deals, trying to mobilize the buyer to actually solve for something. And it's typically ineffective to actually get them to move to solve something. A problem is what gets them to move, not the benefits that they'll receive. And when those techniques are applied to a deal that is already moving and not closing anyway, then it's actually going to decrease the likelihood that you're going to close them, not increase it. Okay, so I want to answer one of these questions. So Justin basically asked, would you recommend telling the buyer something that they're not aware of right at the start of outbound? Or should we start a conversation and then show them the problem later on? It's a great question. So I'm going to highlight something somewhat small, but I would say, the question is, would you recommend telling the buyer something that they're not aware of right at the start of outbound? So anytime you're kind of in Tellville, I get a little bit nervous, meaning the only thing that I want at the beginning of outbound is basically data points to diagnose a problem that they didn't know about. So to diagnose a problem that they didn't know about, unless you have external evidence that you can track it, like for instance, I go shop all of my customers or all of my clients that are within, that I'm in discovery with, and I request a demo from them and I chart my journey. I'm like, how quickly did they, let me book a meeting? How many emails do they send me in follow up? How many calls do they make? Do they send a voicemail? And then I also request a demo from their competitor. So that's an example where I can do the data dig to diagnose essentially without them. But most case scenarios, you're actually going to have to get a data point from them to be able to diagnose anything. So it's a great question. So typically it's within discovery is where I'm asking for those data points. What's your open rate? What time of day are you calling on someone? I was helping a team sell into maintenance directors the other day. So I said a question, for instance, that you wouldn't know the data point to, but would help you diagnose something they didn't know is how much proactive and reactive maintenance are you doing? So most of the meaty diagnosis that you're going to be doing, you actually have to get access to the patient. Now, if you're going outbound and you're in the prospecting vein, you don't necessarily have that data. So the thing that I would mention in that case scenario is, typically speaking, I'll mention a stat and go ask them as a CTA to go look up their rate. So it sounds something like this. Hi, Justin. Reason for my outreach is I've been following, I usually use a line of personalization, something that they did in specific. I'm like, I'm sure you've already come across this, but the industry average open rate is 15 to 25, and the industry average reply rate is 0.5 to 0.7. One of the reasons they're so low is actually a problem with email deliverability. If you wouldn't mind doing me a favor, if you go back and you look at your open rate internally, if you're anything over 70%, then you actually don't have an email deliverability problem, and I'm going to leave you alone. But if it is anything under 50%, then there's an email deliverability problem that if you give me a shot Thursday at 2, I can walk you through a couple of tips, whether you decide to continue the conversation or not. So I give them a data point to benchmark where most people are, and then also the benchmark of where they would have to be to essentially have the problem that they go and diagnose, get the data point, and come back to me if it's within a range. So that's a way that you can do it within outbound prospecting in specific. But within outbound discovery, the short answer to your question is, Justin, is I'm digging those data points right off the bat, right? So I'm asking before I tell them anything. So yeah, of course. So something that can lose a lot of credibility is if you tell someone that they have a problem. Number one, that from a psychology view, they're going to start to repel. if I say you're this way, you have this problem, for any action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. Meaning if I say show up at 3, you won't show up at 3. If I say don't push this button, you want to push this button. If I say you have this problem, from a psych view, they're going to do everything in their brain basically to say why you're incorrect. But the other piece is I can't say confidently that you have a problem until I get the answers to some questions. So from discovery perspective, that's where I'm hunting in the first, really the whole first call. So I don't demo anything within the first call, essentially. Great question. Okay, now we're going to shove off into lap 2. So this is essentially what is the difference between ROI and COI? So ROI is going to be return on investment. What are the benefits that you're going to receive from using my platform? The second avenue that people pursue, that status quo sellers pursue, is COI. I always get reverent, because this is a very deceptive tactic. And the reason it's a deceptive tactic is it's trying to get the buyer to believe that their current state, that the pain of staying the same is much worse than their pain of actually changing. So you're going to have pain in either case scenario. It's a pain to actually change something. And in some cases, it's a pain to continue to acquire the impact. So anytime that the pain of staying the same, what's going to happen to them is if they stay the same, rises above the pain to actually change, that's when you're going to see someone mobilized to buy. So it's not amount of is there pain, it's which pain bucket is worse or less. So the reason it's really deceptive is because it's the North Star of the seller. What they're trying to do is to get the buyer to think in a certain way, to believe that the pain of not doing anything is much higher than moving. So in enters basically the agenda. So the difference between a doctor and a lawyer, if you were to ask two people, and if y'all would jump in the chat, what do you think of a doctor and a lawyer? Which one's cleaner? Which one's a little bit more sleazy and which one's cleaner? Hypothetiquement, hypothetically. Which one has a reputation for being more malevolent and for being more, leading, sleazy, agenda-driven? Oh, we don't like this person. Lawyers or doctors? So usually you have a difference. I'm going to wait for people to enter in the chat here. But usually you have a difference between doctors and lawyers. Both ask questions, both have a goal, but because their agenda is different, the questions also are different. So some people will say, well, hypothetically though, Becc, you can do both. Meaning when you're calculating COI, so Kirsten nailed it. She said the doctor is better. Oh, Jay Frank, everyone basically is nailing it. Justin, the doctor has a cleaner image. And the reason we think of them as cleaner is because their agenda is to diagnose. Whereas the lawyer, their agenda is to prove something or get someone else to believe something that they need them to believe. So this is a mirrored example to COI is the lawyer, and diagnostic selling, diagnosing unknowns, is the doctor. So I don't think it necessarily has to do with the person. And now I do think it has to do with the person on how comfortable they are selling on COI. If they are, I'd be like, I'd have some hesitance. But basically, the agenda is what's different. So in diagnostic selling, if I'm diagnosing and my North Star is truly helping, I'm going to diagnose as many things as I can that the buyer believes that aren't true, which is a misdiagnosis, or that they didn't believe, or that they weren't aware that existed at all, which is a misdiagnosis. So I'm going to spend all my time there, regardless of it's a root cause that I can solve, regardless of if it's something that probably won't mobilize them, regardless of if it's something that has any kind of relationship to me as a seller or my product. All my calories are going to be diagnosing. And here's the thing, they can feel it. they can. And the litmus test I'm going to give is, since I flipped to a diagnosis model, I haven't gotten objections. So an objection is, it's a Latin term, late Latin term and a French term, is you're on the offensive, trying to book a meeting, close a sale, whatever. They notice it and they throw an object up in your way to slow you down. So I've noticed two interesting things in my discovery calls since I flipped to a diagnosis model. Number one is I haven't gotten any objections. And the second one, which was shocking, is I have not once gotten asked, how do I differ from a competitor? I would say around 90% of my deals are competitive, meaning there's other people in the mix, other sales trainers, discovery trainers, whatever. And not yet on deck have I been asked, how do you compare? And I have to guess that that has nothing to do with me, that has everything to do with my agenda within the call. So I'm trying to diagnose as many unknowns as are true, basically, about their current state, whether they have anything to do with me or not. And so the more and more and more and more and more that I diagnose these unknowns, the more and more they believe two things. Number one, that my agenda is to help them, because it is. And number two, my expertise in their mind is growing organically. So essentially, there's FUD in both cases: fear, uncertainty, and doubt. In status quo, what sellers are typically trying to go the route of, and with COI in specific, ROI, they're trying to drill up the fear of what are you missing out on? What benefits are you missing out on if you don't move forward? COI, they're trying to drill up the fear of what happens to you if you stay as is. Diagnosing also drives up that fear, but how it does is diagnosing problems that they didn't know about. So the problems get bigger, not because the problems grew or you created a problem out of thin air, but because you diagnosed a problem that they didn't know about. So the main difference at the crux of everything is the agenda. So the questions all fall in line with the agenda they have above. Why don't we go straight into the next lap? I want to keep going on this topic, if we don't mind. I think I said, what's the difference for the third lap? So what's really important in both of these cases is, well, I'll give you an example. When you're taking a picture, something that I've noticed is that when you want a high focus, you can focus only on one thing. You can focus on the near term of, like, I'm going to focus on Beck's face, and then everything back here is blurry. Or I can focus on the background, and then Beck's face is blurry. You cannot focus on both. One of them has to suffer. So where I hear COI sellers coming in, and they're like, yeah, Beck, but you can do both. And I'm like, hypothetically, you can. Meaning, in the first case, the background's still in the picture. Technically it is, but it's blurred out because it's not the focus. And so your goal within that room dictates everything. The questions you ask, the types of questions that you ask, the manner that you ask them. So in COI selling, in practice, hypothetically, I could find something they didn't know, but I'm going to find that kind of by default and accidentally. And a lot of the questions are going to be self-diagnosis questions, using the buyer's words of what they believe to calculate the cost of impact, not using the buyer's indicators to diagnose something that they didn't know. So you'll hear a lot of self-diagnosis questions in this realm. What's the impact to you? What are the current effects of blank? How is that going to affect you down the road? What are the ripple effects of this on the organization? What's the main priority that you want to solve? How big is that priority? How quickly do you want to buy? What's the timeline? What happens to you if you don't solve it? And you have to keep in mind, that's like the patient walking in the doctor's office and the doctor's like, what's the root cause? What's the best medication? What's the problem that you have? And if you're going down that route, you're proving to them that you know nothing that they don't know. So best case scenario, how this is going to come off is manipulative, right? And our buyers are starting to feel it and they're starting to shut down. And here's the thing, I'm proud of them for doing that. Their fear in the first case of uncertainty, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, the only time I'm trying to increase that is if truly their fear should be in a higher bracket because there's a problem that exists that they didn't know about. Now, once I diagnose that problem and deliver that problem over to them, I really, and this is going to sound crazy, I'm somewhat agnostic of whether they actually do something about it or not. My job is to diagnose. My job is also to prognose what's going to happen to you if you stay as is. After that, I'll give a couple of recommendations and then I'm going to back off. So I, true story, do not send a follow-up email. I'm like, here's all the stuff. I'll share them on the stuff basically that I went through. Here's all the materials. And then that's it. If I did my job in discovery and I believe the problem is big enough, then they're gonna come back. If not, then I didn't do my job in discovery. Shame on me, right? In no case scenario am I going to try and guilt trip them into, hey, remember when you said this, I don't know why you wouldn't move forward. I don't know, the pain's high enough, time's running out, this thing, on and on and on and on and on. All you're proving to them is that your agenda is to close and has nothing to do with them. So that agenda is going to dictate everything. So the questions you're going to see in COI, and I know I'm spending a lot of time there, but out of the two, it's the more dangerous. The closer something is to correct, and the more something looks genuine and helpful, but isn't actually genuine and helpful with the right intent, the more dangerous it is. Because to your buyer, it can come off as the same. So within indecision deals, I'm going to give you an example. I was listening to a lecture at one point. Someone was talking about indecision. And they said, you need to judge the personality type of the person, right? Are they an indecisive person by nature? Like some people are super indecisive and they're never going to make a decision. And so basically you should shake those prospects out of your pipeline and keep moving. And I'm like, you should absolutely do that if your goal is to sell them. But if your goal is to help them, if someone doesn't realize and makes it a little difficult on me to ask a couple questions to diagnose that there is a big goblin behind them that's going to eat them alive, I'm not going to take their shake off so lightly. Why? Because I give a crap about them. That I'm like, I need to get the answer to this question because I need for you to understand that you have this condition. Now, once I diagnose that, I'm like, here's the information. Call me, beat me. So people will say at the end, I'll say, no next steps. And they always break down. They start laughing. They're like, no next steps. And I'm like, I'm not going to next steps you. That's a self-diagnosis question. What are the next steps? They don't know. They haven't been through the buying process necessarily. So their best case scenario, you're going to give you some false information, what they think is the next step, that they feel accountable to you. And here's the thing, the patient should not feel accountable to the doctor. The patient's accountability is to show up and give it as true information as they can. And when the doctor asks them questions, the doctor has the right intent to answer those questions truthfully so the doctor can come up with the things that are going to hurt them that they didn't know. That's where the patient's allegiance to the doctor ends, right? So that agenda, that North Star is going to affect in COI, it's going to be self-diagnosis questions, manipulation questions that are after getting the buyer to believe that they should buy. Diagnosing is understanding for yourself, should they buy? Do they really have a reason to buy? And oh, by the way, are there things that they didn't know that whether they buy or not, I can hand over to them and give to them just so that they know, just so they have it in their back pocket. Yes, Kirsten said the right intent is key, and you are correct, Kirsten. Here's the really fun thing. In my experience, they can feel it. So, not in all cases, but in a lot of cases, my buyers at the end, we're on the same team, right? So it becomes a really sweet atmosphere of like, hey, I'm going to and that is not because I'm a good person. That is because my intent is to diagnose. So a doctor's character, I mean, and their ability are two different questions, right? So the first thing that has to be answered in people's mind is, do you have the right agenda? And if the agenda is to make them believe something, or the agenda is to make them feel like they should do something, or the agenda is for them to see the benefits, or the agenda is so that you get the information and you know why they want to buy, so that you can hold your huevos and pricing, is actually to their detriment. So if you understand their self-diagnosis information, why they want to buy, what's the impact, what's the problem, what's the root cause, you now understand the problem, the self-diagnosed problem, which from their perspective is actually a detriment. If you know how much, why I need to buy and how much I need to buy, you can hold your gumption within pricing. So buying and selling is a war. And the reason is the two are on opposite sides. One wants to close as much quota as they can. One wants to solve as many problems as they can at the lowest price point. So the thing that I'm pushing people to do, that I'm pushing myself to do every single day, is to learn the information that will help them. Every single day, I have to learn a new theory, for example. I give myself that KPI. I did 2 pocket theory and pocket universe theory yesterday, for instance. I'm like, I don't know what this is, but I think that it could help my buyer eventually. Right? So that is my push, is how can I learn the new information that can help them? So when I see someone say like, oh, I really care about my buyer, so I'm going to ask them about their personal life and their day to day, I'm like, if you really cared about your buyer, you would be savagely tearing through books to understand more information that can help them. If someone could study enough and be smart enough to cure cancer, that's where you show that you care about your buyer, not when you talk about it. And in my experience, unfortunately, those two are mutually exclusive. James's question, I'd be curious how the doctor examples will be compared to outbound opposed to inbound deals that have likely misdiagnosed themselves. Man, this is a great question. Y'all, we're just going to go a little bit longer today. I know that the theme's going to be broken. I know you'll be shattered. So James's question is, how would the misdiagnosis information, a very important question, be applied to outbound versus inbound? So the only difference in outbound versus inbound, well, there's two differences. In outbound, they don't usually believe they have a problem that's big enough. That's why they're outbound, they're staying static. And inbound, they do believe. So inbound conversion is 35%, outbound conversion is 6%, because this case, it's not the seller is better in this case. It's that the buyer already believes, has already made themselves believe, essentially, that the problem is big enough. From a diagnostic perspective, most people would say, I saw this at one point, 2 influencers talking to one another. And one influencer A, basically said something to the degree of, my wife wanted to buy a car. And the salesperson asked her a whole bunch of questions. And she already thought in her head, I already know what I want. I already know what I need to do. So influencer A asked influencer B, should the salesperson have asked questions? Or should they just have sold the car? And I'll never forget this, because it struck me how big the problem is within our industry, how deep it runs. Influencer B said, oh, if she comes in and knows what she wants, then you should just step out of her way, sell it to her, and call it a day. I'll never forget that moment, because it hit me in my core. I'm like, no, because they might be wrong. She might be buying the car because she wants to get her kids to school more safely. So what she needs is more space within the car, and she needs basically safety ratings, seat belts, that have an incredible safety rating. Like, the car is protected, so she needs a bigger car. Whereas in the second scenario, let's say that she's hauling rubble from site to site. She's in construction work or whatever, or she moves houses. She's in real estate and she needs space in the back, like a pickup truck, to be able to fit, whatever, lawnmowers, rubble, or furniture that they're moving from house to house. Two completely different scenarios. And I would be banking on the fact that my buyer is wrong because they normally are. That's why a doctor exists. That's why they're an expert. It's because they ask a certain amount of questions to understand which medication do I need to prescribe to this person to solve this problem in specific. So instead of asking for the medication, so to be short, James, the difference is with inbound, it's even riskier. Outbound, they're 50 feet from the cliff and they're about to jump off this cliff. Inbound, they're 5. So they come in riled up. They're like, this is what I want. This is what I need. People do 20 steps of research on average before they come into a seller. Forrester did a report. They look at industry influencers, they look at reviews, and they look at peer-to-peer. The last lever that they pull is they talk to a seller. So they're doing more research than ever before. But they know in the core of them why there's so much FUD on the back end is because they're still rightfully afraid that they don't know what's the right solution, that they don't know how to use it, and that they won't be able to achieve their outcome even if they did use it in the right way. And that is a very valid fear that we shouldn't be fighting and lowering, but rather that we should be diagnosing and being sure ourselves that this solution is actually going to work. So the wonderful thing is when you diagnose things that they didn't know, it actually does increase their FOMO on the front end because they have more problems than they thought they had before. And it decreases the FOMO because they're more aware than ever before that like they're going through procurement, they're going through leaders, they're going like the internal price tag of what happens if they get it wrong is rising. So instead of trying to convince those people, oh no, we're the right one for you, and why don't we go out to dinner together, and this is some great features, and you can talk to this case study. I would spend all of that time continuing to diagnose things that they don't know, so that they're aware that you're an expert more than they are, which will be very relieving to them. That when you make a recommendation, it was for an actual reason because you have the expertise of what's going to actually work in their situation. That they're not going to be left alone. Your solution is actually going to solve it. But even if they don't move forward with you, they know in their core they're going to have to be left alone to solve their problem with whatever solution. And even in the worst case scenario, what you've done you've just lessened the FOMO because you've increased their education level on what problems are happening within their own department. So if I know more about the problem, I'm more confident that I can solve the actual problem and what I need to use to actually solve it. So I went into a Best Buy and I needed internet, better internet. I went home to Texas and I had seen some freezing basically. And I had a brand new client, enterprise client, the next week with several different sessions. So I went and brought a brand new computer. And I was like, I need to get an extender to take this internet upstairs to my parents' house. So I come riling into Best Buy and I'm like, I need an extender. That was the buyer. I need, right? Thank goodness. The guy at the front was like, can you walk me through why you need an extender? I was like, I need an extender because I've been having a little bit of a lag, in terms of my Zoom connection. So I do sessions this session will be with 150 people. I need to make sure there's absolutely no lag. He's like, okay, so can you describe the system you have today? I was like, well, he has a mesh unit, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, where are the mesh units actually located? And I said, they're located here, here, and here. And here's the room that I'm in. He goes, you actually don't need an extender. If you use an extender, it would cut your internet usage in half. And when I would have found that out was during the session with my brand new client who's enterprise. If he hadn't have asked me those questions. But thank God he did. So he's like, you don't need an extender. You actually just need to move this unit, your mesh unit, closer to your computer and plug in through an Ethernet cable. Do you have an Ethernet cable? So I call my dad. I'm like, what's an Ethernet cable? He's like, we have one. I'm like, great. And my response to him at that point, I still remember him, his name. I wrote him a review. If I'm back in Texas at any point in time and I need technical help, I'm going to him because I'm indebted to him. He didn't make a sale. He actually talked me out of making a sale. However, he won me over as a long-term buyer. And you in selling have to pick. You do. Which one is your North Star? Because he did not make a sale in that case scenario where he could have. However, he helped me in a very sticky situation. So now when I buy anything technical from here on out, I'm going to go straight to him. He didn't even blink whenever I didn't purchase anything. I was like, can I buy you like a sandwich or something? And he was like, no, you're totally fine. He was like, thanks for coming in today. I'm like, thank you. So if the motive is to sell, he would have said, you know, what's the cost of not moving forward with this extender? But if the true North Star is to help them, he didn't help his quota in that moment. But I guarantee you, I've already sent 3 people to him. And I guarantee you I will buy from him because of how he helped me in that moment. So James, I hope that answers your question, but inbound, the trickier situation is you have to diagnose faster and with faster precision because they're closer to making the decision. Justin's question, then we're going to go into lap 4 and we're going to close out. I'm so sorry this is so long. Wouldn't showing COI show leading indicators they're using might be wrong to get the lagging indicator. So what basically Justin's asking, so smart. So he's asking a very incredible question, by the way, Justin. When I saw that question yesterday, I was like, this means he is really listening because that's the path your mind would have gone. So hypothetically, what he's asking for everyone on the line is when you're calculating the cost of inaction. Let me back up. When I said to diagnose things that they don't know, how you do that is that you find out their lagging, leaning, and leading indicators. You find out the industry averages. You find out at what point they cause a problem. And then you find at what point they cause an unknown problem. And then you ask them, what is the value of that indicator? What is your quota? What is your quota attainment? What's your open rate? What's your, what's the formation of your team? Who are the players that you're putting into the game? What's your ball possession rating? How many shots on goal do you have on average? So those are the questions that you're asking. The litmus test is an objective question about the indicators. That's what doctors are asking. They're like, they go in with a lot of information: height, weight, allergies, prehistoric conditions, blood pressure, et cetera, et cetera. So hypothetically, if you're going after cost of inaction, then yes, you would be asking questions about those indicators. But because of the agenda in execution, I've never seen that done. They're asking self-diagnosis questions only, as opposed to asking questions on what the indicators are so they can diagnose themselves. So instead of asking, for instance, if SDR team was 3 booked meetings to 10, instead of asking the question of if I'm going after a horizontal impact, I go to the sales team. So I'd be like, how many sellers do you have, if you don't mind me asking? They're like 10. I'm like, okay, what's the quota based on for each? They're like, it's 1 million. And I'm like, what's their quota attainment so far? They're like 200K. I just found a horizontal impact that they didn't know about. If I was COI selling, because of the agenda, it dictates everything. So like, what's the impact to your sales team of you not hitting booked meetings quota? So because of that, again, that picture, one thing is in focus. And because of that, the other thing always suffers. People always say that they can multitask. So I can do 2 things at once. I'm like, nope, it's not how your brain works. You can contextual shift, meaning very quickly, you can think about Olympics back, Olympics back, Olympics back, whatever the topic is. But you can, at one point in time, only be thinking about one thing. You cannot be thinking about two things at once. Your brain doesn't possess the power. So my question to sellers out there is, which one of those things are you thinking about? Are you thinking about trying to get them to believe that their current state is so bad that they need to move forward and propel into action by making them walk through the self-diagnosis exercise using their own information? What's the impact to you? What's the root cause? To make them believe they should move? Or are you asking the questions to understand whether you believe they think that they should move? Maybe why they were going to get out of the chair is valid. Maybe why they were going to get out of the chair is invalid and they should stay put. Maybe why they should get out of the chair is invalid. However, there's another scary monster behind them that is a completely separate but valid reason of why they should get out of the chair. So it's right answer, wrong math kind of thing. You won't know any of that until you ask those questions. So how they differ is in execution. I have never seen a COI seller ask the indicator questions. They're always after self-diagnosis information. Okay, let's go into lap 4. Brought to you by Starbucks. This is my fancy cup. A little nephew Ben gave it to me. He'll love that. I'll show him the little video. Okay, lap 4. What to base disco calls on instead. So I'm going to walk you through very briefly, and then we can close out for the day unless there are any other questions from anyone. What to base disco calls on instead. So the 2 things to find on a discovery call, well, we'll go to the 3 steps and the 2 things you're after. The 3 steps are understand what they believe and why they believe it. Second step is diagnose what you believe. And the 3rd step is diagnose unknown problems. The value to the buyer is only one of 2 things: a misdiagnosis, something they believe that's not true, that would hurt them if they'd operate on the information, or a missed diagnosis, something that they weren't aware of. There are a lot of different parts to this. Please don't think I'm a dweeb into oblivion, but I'm going to name them. You're like, too late. There are root cause, the leading variable input that you need to change and by how much, the tactical problem, the leading indicator that you need to see as evidence that you've changed in the right direction and by how much, the business problem, the lagging indicator, how much you need to change that for the persona and by how much. There's current persona impact, which is how is that business problem, 3 meanings to 10, affecting them as a persona. The current horizontal impact, how is that 3 meaning to 10 business problem delta affecting the team's horizontal to them. There's a current vertical impact. How is that 3 to 10 meetings delta of the business problem affecting their leaders, like the CRO, for instance? There's a future persona impact. How will that business problem of 3 to 10 meetings delta affect them as a persona in their job, department, role, or personal life in the future? There's a future horizontal impact. How will that business problem, if it stays as it is, that 3 to 10 delta affect their horizontal teams in the future? There's a future vertical impact. How will that 3 to 10 delta business problem affect their vertical leaders in the future? You have an outcome. What is the state necessary to avoid the driving impact? You have the master problem. What is the driving impact, the outcome, and the business problem that needs to be solved and it's all hinged to the driving impact. What lagging indicator metric do they need to solve? What's the future that what is the state that they need to achieve to avoid the driving impact that they're trying to avoid? That's the master problem. All of those criteria, you can find either a misdiagnosis or a misdiagnosis. Something they believe that's not true, or something that they weren't aware of at all. You could find maybe their business problem is correct, but their tactical problem is not right. Maybe their business problem is correct, the tactical problem isn't right. However, another tactical problem actually uses the business problem true. Maybe there's a root cause that they believe that's not correct. It's not causing the root cause. Maybe there's a misdiagnosis root cause that, yes, I need to solve this quality issue with my cold emails, but I also need to solve my email deliverability because only 59% of the emails are actually winding up in the inbox. So discovery, I would be on this savage hunt for their perspective to find any information. Yes, part of it is acquiring all the information that they believe and why they believe it. A doctor's like, what hurts? Why'd you come in today? How long has it been hurting? Can you tell me the story of how it happened? But then the other big bracket is using that information to leverage and ask additional questions to find things that they didn't know. So all of that discovery process, my challenge to sellers is this. It's called a discovery call. What are you discovering? Are you discovering what they already know that they need? And are you banking your opinion on it and hinging your cart to it? There's no value in that for them. There's value in that to you as a seller if you want to hold your guts in pricing. There's no value in that for them. Or are you discovering everything that's under the surface? That's what digging is. It's discovering what is underneath that's going to hurt them, whether I solve for that or not, whether they buy from me or not. What is their true actual state? Someone comes in for pain, for a broken arm, or their shoulder hurts or whatever. And the doctor's like, while I have you here, we want to give you a physical because they want to test for blood pressure because people of their age typically, who knows, they're testing for non-pain-based conditions, cancer, pancreatic cancer, breast cancer. They're testing for things that the person doesn't know about, and they're leveraging. They came in for this one appointment, but I want to run a whole bunch of tests just in case I can find something they didn't know. So my entire discovery process is after that, because if I were them, if they were me, that's what they would want the discovery process to be about. So how I can do that and equip myself with the information is, number one, Google your buyer's metrics, leading, leaning, and lagging indicators. The second is find out the industry averages of those metrics. Where are they often at? 4 SQLs per month per rep, 15 to 25% open rate, 18% no-show rate. It's double if you're overcall, etc. Find out at what point do those statistics cause a problem, those indicators cause a problem, and at what point do they cause an unknown problem. And when you're in discovery, all you're doing is asking questions about those indicators to find those unknowns. That is it. Longest Olympic session ever. I'm going to call this one the marathon. There's an actual marathon. So, okay, we have another question up here, but I feel like I've roasted everything. Yeah, there you go. It keeps popping up as LinkedIn user. I'm not sure why. Oh, is it Federico? Federico from Mexico. So I'm going to answer that question. We can kick off with your question next time. I can't remember who it was. So Ian. Oh, okay. He's asked for the best asset. If you go to flipthescript.com and you click written in and click how to diagnose, there's an asset, I believe it's the third asset down, written asset down, and it's how to diagnose, measure, and something else a problem. It's something with to that degree. How to diagnose, measure, and uncover a problem. It's a guide. I'm talking guide. Like this thing is, who knows, 15 pages long. It's built as a glossary, but that is the number one asset that I would definitely recommend if you want to check out more. So all you need is an email, and it's Praxis for you on the site. That is everyone. Thank you so much for coming. Those were two of the meatiest topics to cover. So in summary, we covered what is ROI, it's just talking about the benefits, agnostic of a problem, and COI, getting them to believe that they need to propel into action, and what's the difference, why are they awry, it's the agenda, what should we do instead, diagnose unknowns. Thank you so much to Paul Federico, Kirsten. Me and Min are in talks about how to rank gold medals. Y'all have been incredible, honestly. James, Gianluca, Lori. I mean, y'all have really made this a lot of fun. And I mean that. It's getting more fun and more fun for me every day. So hope that everyone has a great rest of your day. À demain. Merci pour tout. Je vous remercie d'être bien là. I will see you tomorrow. À bientôt. À demain. Merci pour tout. Et au revoir to everyone. Thank you for coming.